Imagine walking through the most secure museums in the world, passing artifacts that have puzzled humanity for centuries. Behind glass cases sit objects that refuse to give up their secrets. In dusty archives lie documents that tell impossible stories. And scattered across our planet are places where history simply stops making sense. Tonight, we're diving into 7 mysteries that have haunted historians, archaeologists, and investigators for generations. These aren't ghost stories or urban legends. These are real events, documented in official records, witnessed by credible people, yet they remain as baffling today as the day they happened. Some involve entire civilizations that vanished without explanation. Others center on individuals who defied everything we know about what's possible. And one involves a case so strange that it's been classified by governments for nearly a century. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about our past. Because sometimes the truth is far stranger than fiction. Mystery 1: The vanishing of the Roanoke colony. The year was 1587. 115 English colonists arrived on a small island off the coast of what would become North Carolina. They came with dreams of building a new life in the New World. 3 years later, they had simply disappeared. When supply ships finally returned to Roanoke Island in 1590, they found something that still sends chills down historians' spines. The entire settlement was abandoned. Houses stood empty, but they weren't destroyed by battle or burned by fire. Personal belongings were left behind, as if the colonists had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. The only clue was a single word carved into a wooden post: Croatoan. But this wasn't just any word. It was the name of a nearby island where friendly Native Americans lived. The logical explanation would be that the colonists had relocated there for safety or resources. But here's where the mystery deepens. When search parties reached Croatoan Island, they found no trace of the missing colonists. No European artifacts, no mixed communities, no graves. It was as if 115 people had been erased from existence. Over the centuries, theories have ranged from the practical to the bizarre. Some historians believe the colonists integrated so completely with local tribes that they lost their European identity within a generation. Archaeological evidence has been found suggesting some colonists may have traveled inland and established small communities that were eventually absorbed into Native American societies. But other theories are far more disturbing. Some researchers point to evidence of extreme drought conditions that might have forced desperate decisions. Others suggest that Spanish forces, threatened by English expansion, may have captured and relocated the entire population. There are even darker possibilities involving conflicts that left no survivors to tell the tale. DNA studies of local Native American populations have yielded tantalizing but inconclusive results. Some genetic markers suggest European ancestry, but proving a direct link to the Roanoke colonists remains elusive. What makes this mystery particularly haunting is the silence. Throughout history, when communities face disasters, there are usually survivors, witnesses, or at least evidence of what happened. But Roanoke offers us nothing but questions and that single cryptic word carved into wood. The lost colony of Roanoke represents something deeply unsettling about the early colonial period. The idea that entire communities could simply vanish, leaving behind only ghosts and speculation. Mystery 2: The Antikythera mechanism. In 1901, sponge divers working off the Greek island of Antikythera made a discovery that would shake our understanding of ancient technology. Among the artifacts recovered from a 2,000-year-old shipwreck was a corroded bronze object that looked like nothing anyone had ever seen before. At first glance, it appeared to be just another piece of ancient metalwork. But as researchers began to study it more closely, they realized they were looking at something impossible. This wasn't just a decorative object or a piece of art. It was a machine, a complex, sophisticated machine with dozens of interlocking bronze gears, all designed with mathematical precision. But this machine was created around 100 BCE, during a time when historians believed such advanced mechanical technology wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. Modern X-ray analysis and 3D modeling have revealed the true complexity of what's now called the Antikythera mechanism. This ancient device could predict the positions of the sun, moon, and planets with remarkable accuracy. It could calculate eclipses decades in advance. It tracked the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games. Some researchers believe it may have even predicted the movements of all the planets known to ancient astronomers. Think about that for a moment. 2,000 years ago, someone created what was essentially an ancient computer, capable of astronomical calculations that wouldn't be matched until the Renaissance. The level of mathematical knowledge, mechanical engineering, and metalworking skill required to build this device challenges everything we thought we knew about ancient Greek capability. Who built it? The craftsmanship suggests it came from a workshop that specialized in creating such devices, which means this wasn't a one-off invention. There may have been others, perhaps many others, but if so, where are they? Why is the Antikythera mechanism the only surviving example of such advanced ancient technology? Some researchers believe it was created by followers of the ancient Greek mathematician Hipparchus, known for his work in astronomy and trigonometry. Others point to the island of Rhodes, which had a reputation for mechanical innovation in the ancient world. But perhaps the most intriguing question isn't who built it, but what it represents. If ancient Greeks could create mechanical computers capable of complex astronomical calculations, what other technologies might have existed that we've lost to time? How much knowledge disappeared when libraries burned and civilizations fell? The Antikythera mechanism forces us to reconsider our assumptions about technological progress. Maybe innovation isn't always a straight line forward. Maybe sometimes humanity takes giant leaps forward, only to lose that knowledge and have to rediscover it centuries later. Mystery 3. The Dancing Plague of 1518. The summer of 1518 in Strasbourg was unlike any other in recorded history. It began with one woman, whose name history records as Frau Trophäa, stepping into the street and beginning to dance. At first, passers-by might have assumed she was celebrating something, or perhaps entertaining a crowd. But as hours passed, then days, it became clear that something was terribly wrong. Frau Trophäa couldn't stop dancing. She danced until her feet bled. She danced until she collapsed from exhaustion, only to rise and continue dancing. And then, something even more bizarre happened. Other people began to join her. Within a week, dozens of people were dancing uncontrollably in the streets of Strasbourg. Within a month, the number had grown to around 400 people. They danced day and night, many without food or water, their feet bleeding, their bodies breaking down from exhaustion. Historical records suggest that several people may have literally danced themselves to death. This wasn't an isolated incident or a case of mass hysteria that lasted a few hours. The dancing plague of 1518 continued for months, affecting hundreds of people in a documented, witnessed, and officially recorded event that challenges our understanding of both psychology and medicine. Local authorities were baffled. They consulted physicians, who initially believed that the only cure was more dancing. Stages were constructed, musicians were hired, and professional dancers were brought in to help the afflicted dance their way to recovery. This decision only seemed to make things worse, as more people joined the compulsive dancing. Religious leaders declared it a curse, brought on by Saint Vitus as punishment for the community's sins. They organized processions and prayers, hoping to break what they saw as a supernatural affliction. Modern medical experts have proposed various theories to explain what happened in Strasbourg. Some point to ergot poisoning from contaminated grain, which can cause convulsions and hallucinations. Others suggest it was a form of mass psychogenic illness, a psychological condition where physical symptoms spread through a group due to stress and suggestion. But neither explanation fully accounts for the specific nature of the dancing, its duration, or its spread pattern. Ergot poisoning typically causes different symptoms and doesn't create the sustained, rhythmic movement seen in Strasbourg. Mass hysteria usually resolves much more quickly and doesn't typically result in such physically demanding behaviors. Some historians have looked at the social and economic conditions of early 16th century Strasbourg for clues. The region was experiencing severe famine, disease, and social upheaval. Perhaps the dancing plague was a form of collective psychological break, a community's mind snapping under unbearable pressure. But this raises even more disturbing questions. If extreme stress can cause hundreds of people to literally dance themselves to death, what does that tell us about the human mind's response to trauma? And why dancing? Why not some other compulsive behavior? The dancing plague of 1518 remains one of the most bizarre and unsettling events in recorded history. It's a reminder that even in our modern age of psychological understanding, there are aspects of human behavior that remain deeply mysterious and profoundly disturbing. Mystery 4. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart. On July 2, 1937, the most famous female aviator in the world vanished somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. Amelia Earhart was attempting to become the first woman to fly around the world when her Lockheed Electra disappeared near Howland Island, taking with it one of aviation's greatest pioneers and creating one of the 20th century's most enduring mysteries. The official story seems straightforward. Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, were running low on fuel while searching for Howland Island, a tiny speck of land in the vast Pacific that served as their refueling stop. Radio communications suggest they were unable to locate the island and presumably crashed into the ocean when their fuel ran out. But the official story has never satisfied investigators, family members, or the thousands of researchers who have spent decades trying to solve this mystery. Because the evidence doesn't quite fit the simple narrative of a tragic accident. The first mystery centers on the radio transmissions. After Earhart's plane supposedly crashed into the ocean, radio operators around the Pacific began picking up distress signals that appeared to come from her aircraft. These transmissions continued for days, sometimes weeks, after the disappearance. The signals included Earhart's voice, mentions of rising water, and desperate pleas for help. If the plane had crashed into the deep ocean, how could it continue transmitting? Radio equipment of that era wouldn't function underwater, and the Pacific Ocean around Howland Island is thousands of feet deep. This led investigators to consider other possibilities. Maybe Earhart didn't crash into the ocean. Maybe she made it to land somewhere. The most compelling alternative theory centers on Gardner Island, now known as Niku Maroro, located about 350 miles from Howland Island. In 1940, just 3 years after Earhart's disappearance, a British colonial officer found human bones on the island, along with artifacts that could have come from a 1930s aircraft. The bones were initially examined and dismissed as belonging to a man, but modern forensic analysis suggests they may have actually belonged to a woman of Earhart's height and build. Other artifacts found on the island over the years include a piece of aluminum that matches the type used on Earhart's plane, a woman's compact mirror from the 1930s, and remnants of shoes that match the style Earhart was known to wear. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence comes from photograph analysis. In 2017, a History Channel documentary claimed to have found a photograph showing Earhart and Noonan alive in the Marshall Islands, captured by Japanese forces. The image allegedly shows two figures on a dock that match the physical descriptions of the missing aviators. However, this photograph was later debunked when researchers discovered it had been published in a Japanese book before Earhart's disappearance, making it impossible for it to show the missing flyers. This brings us to one of the most controversial theories about Earhart's fate: that she was captured by Japanese forces and died in captivity. Some researchers believe Earhart was on a secret spy mission for the US government, using her round-the-world flight as cover to photograph Japanese military installations in the Pacific. According to this theory, when Earhart's plane went down, she and Noonan were captured by Japanese forces and held as prisoners. Some witnesses in the Marshall Islands claimed to have seen a female American aviator in Japanese custody during the late 1930s. But why would the US government cover up such a mission? And if Earhart was indeed captured, what happened to her ultimately? The mystery of Amelia Earhart represents more than just a missing person case. It's a story about courage, exploration, and the price of pushing boundaries. Whether she died in a crash, survived on a deserted island, or was captured by enemy forces, her disappearance reminds us that even in our modern connected world, people can still simply vanish, leaving behind only questions and the echoes of their final radio transmissions. Mystery 5. The Voynich Manuscript. Deep in the archives of Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book Library sits one of the most mysterious documents ever created. The Voynich Manuscript is a 240-page book written in an unknown script, filled with bizarre illustrations of plants that don't exist, astronomical diagrams that make no sense, and human figures in scenes that defy interpretation. For over a century, the world's best cryptographers, linguists, and computer scientists have tried to decode this medieval puzzle. During World War II, American and British codebreakers who had successfully cracked enemy military codes turned their attention to the Voynich manuscript. They failed completely. Modern supercomputers and artificial intelligence systems have been unable to make sense of its contents. Carbon dating places the manuscript's creation between 1404 and 1438, somewhere in Central Europe. But that's about all we know for certain. The text is written in an unknown alphabet, using an unknown language, following unknown rules of grammar and syntax. What makes the Voynich manuscript particularly puzzling is that it's clearly not random scribbles or meaningless decoration. Statistical analysis shows that the text follows patterns consistent with natural language. There are repeated words, consistent spelling patterns, and even what appears to be grammar structures. Someone was definitely trying to communicate something, but what? And why in a code so complex that it remains unbroken after 600 years? The illustrations provide tantalizing but frustrating clues. The botanical section shows dozens of plants, drawn with careful detail an obvious scientific knowledge. But botanists have been unable to identify any of the plants depicted. Some appear to be combinations of real plants, while others seem entirely fantastical. The astronomical section includes circular diagrams that might represent celestial movements, zodiac signs, or calendar systems. Some researchers believe they can identify certain constellation patterns, but others argue that the astronomical information is too distorted or symbolic to be useful. Perhaps most intriguing is the biological section, which shows dozens of nude female figures in what appears to be an elaborate water system, complete with pipes, pools, and strange containers. Some researchers interpret these as medical or alchemical diagrams, possibly related to medieval ideas about reproduction or health. Over the centuries, theories about the manuscript's origin and purpose have ranged from the scholarly to the wild. Some researchers believe it's the work of Roger Bacon, the 13th century philosopher and scientist, who was known for his interest in codes and secret knowledge. Others suggest it might be the creation of a medieval alchemist, recording secret formulas and processes in an unbreakable cipher. More exotic theories propose that the manuscript contains lost medical knowledge from a forgotten civilization, or even that it's a, quote, elaborate hoax created by a skilled forger to fool manuscript collectors. Recent computer analysis has revealed some fascinating patterns. The text appears to have two different languages or dialects, suggesting that either two different people worked on it, or that it records information from two different sources. Some sections show statistical patterns similar to natural languages, while others appear more formulaic, like recipes or instruction. In 2019, a computer scientist claimed to have partially decoded the manuscript, suggesting that it was written in abbreviated Latin and contained information about women's health and medicinal recipes. However, other experts quickly challenged this interpretation, pointing out that the supposed Latin translations often made little sense and required extremely creative interpretation to be meaningful. The Voynich manuscript continues to attract researchers from around the world, each convinced they might be the one to finally crack its code. But as years pass and new technologies fail to unlock its secrets, some experts are beginning to wonder if we're approaching the mystery from the wrong direction entirely. Perhaps the Voynich manuscript isn't meant to be read in the way we normally read books. Maybe it's a teaching tool, a meditation aid, or an art project that was never intended to convey literal information. Or maybe it's exactly what it appears to be, a scientific textbook from a lost branch of medieval knowledge that we simply don't have the context to understand. Mystery 6, the Tunguska event. At 7:17 a.m. on June 30th, 1908, something exploded over the remote Tunguska region of Siberia with the force of 185 Hiroshima bombs. The blast was so powerful that it flattened 80 million trees across 830 square miles of forest. An object large enough to cause such devastating destruction should have left behind significant physical evidence, but the impact site contains only microscopic particles that might or might not be of extraterrestrial origin. The second mystery is why it took so long for anyone to investigate. The explosion occurred in one of the most remote regions of Russia, inhabited only by indigenous Evenk people who spoke of a powerful god destroying the forest. It wasn't until 1927, nearly 20 years later, that the first scientific expedition reached the site. What that expedition found defied explanation. Trees weren't just knocked down randomly. They were flattened in a massive radial pattern, all pointing away from a central location. But at the very center of this devastation, some trees remained standing, stripped of their branches, but still vertical. This pattern suggested an air-burst explosion, something that detonated several miles above the ground rather than impacting the Sioux. Witness accounts from the few people in the region that morning describe phenomena that sound almost supernatural. They reported a column of blue light moving across the sky, followed by a flash brighter than the sun. The heat was so intense that people reported feeling like their clothes were on fire, even from distances of 40 miles away. The atmospheric effects were equally mysterious. For days after the explosion, people across Europe and Asia reported strange phenomena in the sky. Nights were so bright that people could read newspapers by the glow. The sun appeared blue in some locations. These effects were documented as far away as London and Washington, D.C. Over the decades, scientists have proposed numerous explanations for the Tunguska event. The meteorite theory remains most popular, but it has significant problems. Comets are largely made of ice and rock, which should leave behind some physical evidence, even if most of the object vaporized on impact. Some researchers have suggested that the explosion was caused by a small black hole passing through Earth, but this theory has been largely discredited because a black hole would have caused an exit event on the opposite side of the planet, which wasn't observed. More exotic theories have proposed that the explosion was caused by antimatter, ball lightning, or even a malfunctioning alien spacecraft. While these ideas capture public imagination, they lack scientific support and multiply mysteries rather than solving them. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the Tunguska event is what it tells us about our planet's vulnerability. Whatever caused the explosion, it demonstrated that Earth is constantly at risk from cosmic events that could have devastating consequences. If the Tunguska explosion had occurred over a populated area instead of remote Siberian forest, it could have killed millions of people. Modern researchers continue to visit the Tunguska site, using advanced technology to search for clues that earlier expeditions might have missed. Satellite imagery has revealed subtle patterns in forest regrowth that might indicate the exact nature of the explosion. Soil samples continue to be analyzed for microscopic evidence of extraterrestrial materials. But more than a century later, the Tunguska event remains fundamentally unexplained. We know something incredibly powerful exploded over Siberia in 1908. We know it flattened millions of trees and created atmospheric effects visible around the world. But we still don't know what it was, where it came from, or why it left behind so little physical evidence. The Tunguska event serves as a humbling reminder that even in our age of scientific advancement, our planet can be struck by forces we don't understand, leaving behind mysteries that may never be solved. Mystery 7, the Dyatlov Pass incident. In February 1959, 9 experienced Soviet hikers set out on a winter expedition to reach Otorten Mountain in the northern Ural Mountains. None of them returned alive. What happened to the Dyatlov group has become one of the most analyzed and debated mysteries of the 20th century, spawning countless theories but no definitive answers. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student with extensive hiking experience. The team consisted of 8 men and 2 women, all experienced winter hikers and mountaineers. They were well-equipped, well-trained, and familiar with the harsh conditions of the Ural Mountains. When the group failed to return as scheduled, search parties were organized. What they found on what became known as Dyatlov Pass defied all explanation and rational understanding. The searchers discovered the group's tent, cut open from the inside, abandoned in the middle of a snowstorm. The hikers had apparently fled their shelter in the middle of the night, leaving behind shoes, warm clothing, and essential survival equipment. Footprints in the snow showed that some members of the group had left the tent barefoot or wearing only socks. The trail of footprints led about a mile down the slope to the edge of a forest, where searchers found the first two bodies under a large cedar tree. These hikers had apparently tried to build a fire, and their hands showed evidence of climbing the tree, possibly to look back toward their abandoned campsite or to break off branches for fuel. The other bodies were found over the following weeks, scattered along the route between the forest and the tent. But the condition of the bodies raised more questions than answers. 3 of the hikers showed signs of massive internal trauma. 1 had major chest fractures, another had severe skull damage, and a third was missing her tongue and eyes. The force required to cause such injuries would have been enormous, equivalent to a severe car crash. Yet there were no external wounds and no signs of a struggle. The other 6 hikers appeared to have died of hypothermia, which would be expected for people caught outside in a Siberian winter without proper clothing. But this still didn't explain why they had abandoned their tent so suddenly, or why they had cut their way out instead of using the entrance. The Soviet investigation concluded that the deaths were caused by a compelling natural force. But this vague explanation satisfied no one, and only fueled decades of speculation about what really happened on Dyatlov Pass. The theories have ranged from the plausible to the bizarre. Some researchers believe the group was caught in a katabatic wind, a sudden, powerful downdraft that can occur in mountain environments. Such a wind could have damaged their tent and created sounds and conditions terrifying enough to cause experienced hikers to flee into the night. Others point to the possibility of an avalanche. While the slope wasn't steep enough for a typical avalanche, some experts suggest that a small, localized snowslide could have damaged the tent and injured some group members, leading to the panicked evacuation. More exotic theories involve military activity. The Ural Mountains were home to several secret Soviet facilities, and some researchers believe the hikers may have witnessed a weapons test or been caught in the aftermath of a military accident. This could explain the unusual radiation detected on some of the clothing, as well as the traumatic injuries that looked like they were caused by extreme pressure rather than blunt force. Some witnesses reported seeing strange lights in the sky on the night the hikers died, leading to speculation about experimental aircraft or even UFO encounters. However, such reports were common in the Soviet Union during the early space age, as various military and scientific programs tested rockets and other devices. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the Dyatlov Pass investigation using modern forensic techniques. Their conclusion was that the deaths were caused by a rare type of avalanche called a katabatic wind avalanche, which could explain both the tent damage and the pattern of injuries. However, this official explanation still doesn't satisfy many researchers and family members of the victims. The avalanche theory doesn't fully account for the radiation found on the clothing, the specific pattern of injuries, or some of the stranger details that have emerged over the decades. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Dyatlov Pass incident is how it highlights the fragility of human life in extreme environments. 9 experienced, well-equipped hikers died in a matter of hours, and despite decades of investigation, we still don't fully understand why. The incident has become a cultural phenomenon, inspiring books, movies, documentaries, and countless online discussions. But beneath all the speculation and theorizing lies a simple, tragic fact. 9 young people died in circumstances that continue to puzzle investigators more than 60 years later. The Dyatlov Pass incident reminds us that even in our modern world, there are events that resist easy explanation. Sometimes people die in ways that challenge our understanding of what's possible, leaving behind only questions and the haunting knowledge that nature still holds secrets we may never fully comprehend. 7 mysteries, 7 windows into the unknown corners of our history. From ancient civilizations that vanished without explanation to modern tragedies that defy investigation, these stories remind us that the past is far from settled. Each of these mysteries represents thousands of hours of research, investigation, and debate by some of the world's brightest minds. Yet they remain unsolved, continuing to challenge our assumptions about what we know and what we think is possible. Perhaps that's what makes these stories so compelling. In an age where we can instantly access almost any information, where satellites can photograph every corner of the Earth, and computers can process vast amounts of data in seconds, these mysteries remain stubbornly mysterious. They remind us that despite all our technological advancement, there are still questions without answers, still puzzles that refuse to be solved. What do you think happened to the colonists of Roanoke? Who built the Antikythera mechanism? And what other ancient technologies have we lost? What caused hundreds of people to dance themselves to death in medieval Strasbourg? Where is Amelia Earhart? What secrets does the Voynich manuscript contain? What exploded over Tunguska? And what really happened to those 9 hikers on Dyatlov Pass? These mysteries continue to fascinate us because they represent the limits of human knowledge. They remind us that history isn't just a collection of facts and dates, but a vast ocean of human experience, much of which remains unexplored and unexplained. The next time you walk through a museum, flip through a history book, or hear about an archaeological discovery, remember that behind every artifact and every story are countless others that remain hidden, waiting to be discovered, waiting to challenge everything we think we know about our past. Because somewhere out there, in archives and excavation sites, in forgotten documents and unexplored regions of our planet, the next great mystery is waiting to be uncovered. And when it is, it will remind us once again that the most interesting thing about history isn't what we know, it's what we don't know yet.